This video is about the Falklands War. On the 2nd of April 1982, Argentinian forces invaded the Falklands. By the 20th of May, the war was over and the British emerged victorious. Prime Minister was Margaret Thatcher, commander of the task force, Rear Admiral Sandy Woodward, commander of the ground forces, Major General Jeremy Moore, and for the Royal Marines, Brigadier Julian Thompson. The head of the military junta in Buenos Aires was General Leopoldo Galtieri, and Mario Menendez, a brigadier, was the commander of the Argentinian forces on the Falklands. The Falklands had influence from different nations. There were the Dutch, the French, the Argentinians, but for more than 100 years, the Falklands were under British reign, and the people of the Falklands, more importantly, saw themselves as being British. Despite that, the Argentinians claimed the Falklands and intensified their claims during the 1970s. In Argentina, there was a military junta, not very popular because the country was in a deep political and economic crisis. The situation in Britain was also not too good because the country was just at the beginning of a period of major economic and societal reforms. The international influence decreased, and there was a threat that Britain could become a second or third class power just fulfilling a role, or only fulfilling a role, within NATO. So, to divert from internal problems and rally the population behind a common cause, the Argentinian junta decided to invade the Falklands on the 2nd of April 1982. 2 days later, the British task force set sail, and the Royal Air Force established a base on Ascension halfway to the Falklands. Then, firstly, South Georgia was retaken by Special Forces and also Royal Marines with support of the Royal Navy. On the 1st of May, the first of 5 blackbuck raids started or was undertaken by the Royal Air Force. Vulcan bombers were flying from Ascension. They had to be refueled a few times in the air, and they were bombing Stanley Airfield to deny the Argentinians the use of fast jets from the Falklands. The Royal Navy approached, and the Argentinian Navy threatened with a pincer movement a carrier group in the north and a cruiser group in the south. The HMS Conqueror, a submarine, sunk the Belgrano, a cruiser, Argentinian cruiser, and as a result, all Argentinian ships returned to port. Now, Britannia ruled the waves, but not the skies, so the SAS was tasked to raid Pebble Island, where the Argentinians had quite a few ground attack aircraft. SAS, as usual, was successful, so the Royal Navy could land troops at San Carlos Bay. At the same day, the Argentinian Air Force sank the Atlantic Conveyor, a cargo ship bringing the Chinooks to the Falklands. The Chinooks, large helicopters, were supposed to bring the troops forward to the front line, forward to Stanley. Now, the Paras and the Royal Marines had to march across the island. In the language of the Paras, the Royal Marines, they had to yawp. To protect the southern flank and to establish moral superiority over the Argentinians, 2 Para, so 2nd Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, was ordered to attack Goose Green. They succeeded and won the battle against a larger Argentinian force. More forces were brought in, especially Welsh Guards. They were brought in by ship, but then Air Raid Warning Red, Argentinian airstrike, led to the loss of 56 soldiers and 150 wounded. It's a tragic event, but it delayed the operations maximum a day. Then from the 11th to the 13th of June, the battles around the mountains around Port Stanley were fought, British victories, and the next day on the 14th, Argentinian surrender on the Falklands. For the Falklands, that meant status quo antebellum, happy days, we're British again. In Argentina, the military junta collapsed within a year, but Argentina never ceased their claims on the Falklands. They still claim the Falklands to this day. In Britain, everyone was massively proud of this heroic and extraordinary operation. The Conservative government under Thatcher was consolidated, and now internationally, Britain again was a force to be reckoned with. This was the Falklands War in 5.